Welcome back. Well, let's examine this community policing component. Yes, huge amounts of funds have just been approved after the ad hoc committee submitted their report. And then that is what they came up with as a result of that. But how is this? What do we expect moving forward, having seen these approvals? We've got Abe Agiole joining us this morning. He's a former commissioner of police in Kaduna State. He's also a former commandant of Police Mobile Training School. He joins us via Skype from the States. We're also going to have Alfred Onogbo, security consultant, who will also weigh in as well. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. Let me start with you, Mr. Agiole. You've been at the saddle as a CP and several other experiences before becoming the CP and even afterwards. About this community policing, we know different IGPs approach it in different ways that they think will work. But having seen, some excerpts of the report, and then first, the approval of these funds, what does it do? What do we expect? Is this going to, in fact, what's your impression first when you heard about 13 billion naira for community policing? Well, we'll sort that and get back to him while he can. And then let's get Mr. Onogbo at the moment. Mr. Onogbo, can you hear me now? So could you give us your impression? Community policing, what's your impression of this approach now that the government has taken? A huge amount, 13 billion for it.
Thank you very much for having me on. And I want to thank all our viewers and those who are committed to following Channels television. First of all, I'm beginning to think that sometimes political statements precede structural balance. It's good to know that 13 billion has been, let me use the word, earmarked or probably approved for community policing. Now, it's a good news if we have the infrastructures and the necessary institutions that can drive the objectives. But if we do not have the necessary infrastructure to implement the community policing program, then I have a problem with that. And I'd like to say that, well, it's commendable, but the amount going for just community policing without any structures, without any visible establishments, without any form of legislation to drive it, gives me a real concern.
So what is it that you want to see when you highlight all of those? How would you have loved it to be approached?
I think while I want to patronize the government for waking up to the cries of Nigerians about the need to have an efficient policing of our communities and our entire society, I would like to see stakeholders in this industry, stakeholders in the security establishments, sit down to put together what is feasible. I am aware that some state governments have tried to kind of push the community policing program by establishing some organizations within their states to ensure that their people are protected and that their environments are secure. And I would like to emphasize the fact that the government should discuss and kind of sit down with stakeholders. Let's take Nigeria as our collective responsibility. Let's see security of the entire nation as a responsibility that every one of us that are involved could be consulted. I know that could take time, but I'm sure that there are Nigerians who have the experience, who have the exposure, and who can make
Mr.
reasonable
Longo,
input.
when you talk about legislation, that's what I was asking. What kind of legislation is that?
Well, you know that the Nigerian police is established by the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Now, anything you are doing outside the Nigerian police force is like duplicating the efforts or duplicating the provisions of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We must accept that the police is the only institution recognized by the Nigerian Constitution. Now, the issue is, what actually is the problem with the Nigerian police? We must find out so that we don't go on setting organizations. We have civil defense, we have other paramilitary agencies and other security agencies that are all involved in the work of policing Nigeria. How come we are not finding solutions to our security problems? So establishing, I'm for community policing, let nobody misunderstand me, but we must understand why we have not been able to drive the existing establishments efficiently.
All right, at that point, let me bring in Mr. Agiole at that point. Let's see if he could answer some of these questions because he's been on the saddle. Mr. Agiole, so go ahead and tell us. Now, there's a certain mindset that may have been pigeonholed community policing when you hear the funds that have been approved for it. But in addition to, perhaps if you want to respond to what he says at the moment, what is your impression about this amount of funds approved for community policing? Does that solve the challenge?
Thank you, Chamberlain. I think I'll be going along with the last speaker in respect of the funding, the amounts made available. The question is, when we make available certain amounts for the police force, are we certain that this wholesome amount will be released to the police force? And then, if such money is made available, what are the plans on ground for the usage of this money? When we are thinking about community policing, we will look at the concept of policing the community itself and distinguishing it from community policing. I think I will want to see a situation whereby we will not be talking more about the money, but what we will do to actualize the success of this program. And I want to tell you, Chamberlain, we must look at it in two dimensions. That is the people themselves and the police itself. Have we been able to build or develop the partnership between the police and the communities? Have we been able to identify the problems of these communities? And then we now begin to think of implementing these policies. When we look at the police itself, do we have the capacity? The men, are they trained to meet up with these current challenges? The question is, we must be able to harness a kind of social discourse between us and the communities. Don't forget, we are coming from a kind of colonial background, militarized background, whereby policing is more of reactionary. So this fund, honestly, it will go a long way if it's actually released to the police force, and then the institution themselves should be able to utilize this fund for the success of this program.
Let me touch on
if this
something
fund available, I will agree that it will help a long way to the success of community policing.
All right, let me touch on the point you made earlier. When you say that will these funds be released and administered properly, stems, I reckon, from a challenge that perhaps you're aware of funds being released and not properly being administered. Is that right? And what are those challenges that might have bedeviled previous scenarios that you want to address if this one is supposed to be utilized judiciously?
I think policies differs a lot, and government's policies are different. And going by the records of this current administration, I think there's need for us to believe that if these funds are released, it will be judiciously used. I believe so.
Does it make any difference? Well, you talked about operationalizing the community policing concept, which, of course, we've been talking about it for years. Now, does it make any difference to you when you hear that the IG, the governors, three governors, the finance minister, and the SGF have been co-opted into an implementation committee? Are you comforted that indeed it will begin well and operates maximally this time?
What is the purpose of governance? To bring the people close to government. If bringing everyone on board to meet up with the challenges we are currently facing, I think that will be fine. It will create a kind of check and balances too, because as a matter of fact, we must admit one fact, but that over the years, the police force has been faced with a lot of challenges, and finances are part of these challenges. And if bringing up such amount and incorporating a lot of these people into, I think it will go well. I think so.
Talking about the training, we know that different times there's been different kinds of training organized for the police for community policing. Does that mean that those are not making any impact whatsoever?
Yes, when we are talking of community policing, I keep insisting that we must make a distinction. In community policing, we must first of all gain the trust of the people. Then when we're talking of training of these policemen, what kind of training do we offer them? Because we are going to start performing responsibilities away from the usual traditional policing system. So these police officers charged with these responsibilities must be conditioned to meet up with these challenges. We have about 774 local governments. Over the past years, have we made our presence felt? When we speak of community policing, have the community actually felt our presence? Have we been able to build the trust between us and the communities? Until these are done, we cannot count that we have succeeded in this aspect of community policing.
So let's begin from there. This is the second time you're talking about this trust, quotient between the police and the people. And you also spoke about the difference between community policing and policing the community. Now, how do we bridge this gap? First of all, we can readily understand the difference between policing the community and community policing. How do we bridge that trust gap? Because already there is a public perception about the police. So how do we bridge that gap and then segue into this community policing bit?
When you are policing the community, it's a kind of reactionary force. We all about arrest, investigation, prosecution. And, because I keep insisting that over the years, don't forget, we're coming from a background whereby the function of the police has been very difficult to distinguish between our function and military function. We have functioned so much with the military that the orientation of the average policeman has not changed. So the issue between him and the public is a kind of use of force. And so we need to come back, sit down, evaluate this, build a trust, allow these people to understand that our present day policing is different from what they used to know. We must build an understanding between us and these communities. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult because, like you said, there's a loss of trust already. And this spans from a lot of misconceptions between the police force and the communities. And so by the time we're able to build this trust between us and the communities, honestly, any fund made available can be able to make a meaningful impact. But first of all, it's not about just the funding. The major actors in this field need to be properly trained to understand the concept of community policing. And
in fact, that's where I was leading up to next.
This seeming relationship between us and these communities in which
different IGPs, they approach this differently. So tell us, I mean, from someone watching from a distance, what are those characteristics? What should he see when we talk about community policing?
We must build a relationship between us and people. The police force is supposed to be meant for the people, not the people for the police force. And I think currently a lot of efforts have been done, and I have to appreciate the present IGP. He is doing a lot to be able to bridge this gap. But honestly, there's a lot yet to be done. And if we do not work towards meeting up with these challenges, then it's going to be far-fetched from us achieving the desired result, no matter the fund that is made available.
So where lies the consideration which several people speak about, saying, look, if you want people to police communities, they must be perhaps indigenes of those areas or residents of those areas who understand the nook and cranny about that community. Is that an important factor at all?
If we recall, between I think 1988 and 89, there was this issue of police officers for certain ranks going back to their home states to function. It's a kind of community policing, and honestly, it met some obstacles because we were not prepared. The policemen that went back home were not prepared. They were not conditioned. They did not understand the concept. So going back and working became so difficult, and this program collapsed. And so I think presently we need to understand the concept for which this idea of community policing is derived from. We must understand the philosophy. What is it in there? And then, Chamberlain, the communities differ. Community policing in Taraba State cannot be the same in Imo State. We have different cultural background, different religion, different ideologies, everything. So by the time you begin to generalize this concept, it doesn't work. We must fashion out different communities with their different styles of community policing. I think in so doing, we might be able to get results.
Let me take this back to Mr. Ononugo. This issue isn't new, as you are very well aware. A number of IGPs have talked about community policing and even done one thing or the other about it over the years. This is perhaps the first time that we're really taking a step to effecting it. And I also remember that not too long ago, the IGP was, conversing with some people and said in that conversation that some strategic things have been done, some institutions have been rooted in various states of the country, that the only thing left to effect the community policing was to recruit the police officers. Now, from some of the things that you have heard Mr. Agiali say, do you have any concerns based on some of the issues that he has raised about the poor trust of the people and inadequate understanding of the concept of community policing?
Oh, certainly. There's a moral disconnect between what we say to the Nigerian people and who the people are. And just like he mentioned, there's a lot of issues that are embedded already in the psyche of an average Nigerian. Let me pick them, as much as I can this morning. One, there is this ethnic consciousness that has evolved, and it's become an explosive discourse. Two, the political class have not also demonstrated serious commitment to the Nigerian state when we talk about being patriotic, being accountable, and being selfless in leadership. Now, people are products of their own system. You can't make snow out of the desert. We need to go back to the drawing board. Go to the police as they are today. People are more conscious of where they come from and what they can get out of the system than what they can give to the system. Professionalism has been pushed to a very serious extent to the background. I don't want to re-echo some explosive things like nepotism, favoritism, connections, and the normal Nigerian balance, man no man. Now, these are cankerworms that has been embedded in the culture of the Nigerian society, and the police is not an exception. So we need to give people a sense of ownership. You cannot own what does not belong to you. The structure of policing today in Nigeria has been like it's for the exclusive privileged members of the society. I'll give you an instance. Like in our last discussion, I mentioned that over 70% of the Nigerian police workforce are engaged in non-policing activities. Some of them are doing VIP protection. Some of them are doing military work. Some of them, are more at home in places that are lucrative. So it's not about giving the quality of service the people need. So when you are putting money on a system like this, it will go down the way others have.
Perhaps that's the reason, Mr. Ononugo, just one moment. Perhaps that's the reason that the IGP said that the point we're at now concerning community policing is recruitment of the officers in or for the community policing initiative. Now, what kind of handshake are you expecting between the police and the governors? Some governors, some state governments already have their own protection, institutions, Neighborhood Watch in Lagos, Amotekun Corps in Ondo, and a number of others coming up like that, and several other parts of the north and the south. So a number of them already have those vigilante groups and all of that. What kind of handshake are you expecting, or do you think will help to ensure that this community policing produces the security that will be good for the people?
Well, while I commend the IG, I think also he should ensure that the governors, for instance, have done their homework well. If you are, for instance, let me give you one of the challenges I have. I love the concept of the Amotekun, but if you come to the western part of Nigeria, you will find every community, every tribe, let me borrow that word, even though I don't like it, but you'll find every nationality of Nigerian people in those places. Now, when the people you recruit into Amateku, for instance, are exclusively Southwesterners and not people who are passionate, who are skilled, who are disciplined, and who want to do the job and deliver on the service, then there will be ultimately a problem. People are going to insinuate, people are going to begin to say, oh, Omoteku is for Yoruba, so let the Igbos go and start their own Agune chamber, and then let the Ariwa people start their own. That will be harmful to the Nigerian state. That is one thing the governors must address, so that we are all coming to the drawing board. The governors are coming with a clear community of people that understand that we must separate ethnicity from the need for security, because crime does not have a tribe. crime is a problem to every society. So if we don't have a collective resolve and a good platform to address the problem of crime in our society, we will suffer more, because very soon some overzealous people that found themselves in the corridors of government in politics might begin to turn these institutions or these efforts, these programs, into tools and weapons to hurt their enemies. They use it to witch hunt people. We've seen it in the past, even the ones existing. Today, certain people could commit certain offenses and they'll be allowed to go home, while certain other people could be arrested for things they didn't even do. And they'll be prosecuted, kept in detention until a time that the people who feel they should go home. So there are moral issues, and we must address it. We must also look at the orientation of the Nigerian society. Some Nigerians in some areas of the country are feeling unsafe because of religious bias. Now, if these things are allowed to creep into the security arrangement, we are in a big problem. So the governors have a very serious role to play. And I'm also thinking that even the National Orientation Agency should be empowered and provided with resources to work at giving Nigerians a sound reorientation. Perception matters in everything. If I perceive that there is insecurity around someone that doesn't speak my language, if he joins the police or community policing program, I will never feel comfortable. I will look forward to the day he will use that position to hurt me. If you go to Kano, for instance, we have the Hizbah. They are operating, but you find out that they are operating on religious lines. They are not standing on the Constitution of the Federal Republic. They are exclusively addressing security from the perspective of the Sharia law.
Okay, Mr. Nonibo, just a moment. All right, sorry about that. Let me bring in Ms. Aguilera on this one as well. Part of what also came up at that meeting, perhaps, which they considered to come up with this, was that they needed to augment the efforts of the state governors who had been supporting one way or the other the police in different states, saying that they were overwhelmed. Now, one wonders, why do you think that in spite of the resources that the governors put in at that time, they still didn't get the desired results?
I think let's be logical here. You are putting money in the constitutional police force, and you are saying you're not seeing results. You bringing in more men and spending more money. I think when we inject this money and when we manage it properly, the problem of the police force, like I keep insisting, is training, capacity building. Men should be prepared for particular responsibilities. Over the years, we do not intend to argue this. Over the years, larger number of the policemen have not received adequate training, and this has to do with finances. Now that the present government is making available such huge amount of money, I think we must look at the area of training, capacity building, getting the police positioned to discharge their responsibility properly, go to the communities, do exactly what they intend to do by partnering with the communities to get results. Because as it is, focus should be less on arrest, prosecution, investigation. We should be dealing with trying to prevent this crime from happening. We are not the proponents of police.
All right, there's this school of thought that believes that, that assumes that this community policing initiative is to stave off all the agitation about state police and perhaps to put an end to all other community policing initiatives that different states or regions may have. Do you subscribe to that?
Yeah, because honestly, community policing is already a form of decentralizing the police force, taking the police back to the roots for them to operate with the community. And like most Nigerians will exercise their fear about state police is because we are trying to get to the stage in which the people themselves will appreciate their police force and not to capitalize on opportunities available to misuse the police force in the states. And I think with the present issue at hand, with the fund released, I think empowering the police to function independently from contributions from the state will give them a kind of form of autonomy to work so hard, because you find out that he who pays the piper dictates the tune. When you have too much interference within the state level, you find out that our functions we have barriers, and so I think
Mr. Aguilera,
there's a problem.
One of those barriers, which has come up several times, even here, I reckon, is the trust. Now, some of those other community policing initiatives that different states have adopted, I think if you look at them closely, there's a higher level of trust between themselves and then the regular policing structure by the establishments, as it were. So how then, if you throw in all of this money and people still don't improve, or the trust doesn't increase amongst the regular policing, because chances are that if they don't tweak who are those carrying out those community policing functions, people may see them as a regular police force, and the mindset will not necessarily change.
That is why the community policing is about bringing together the communities and the traditional police force on the ground. Honestly, when we're able to build this trust, because don't forget, in as long as we continue to function with the community, they'll begin to naturally develop trust, and it depends on our approaches to policing in these communities. By the time we're able to establish a trust between us and the communities, I think naturally they will trust the police and the function becomes easy.
You talked about trust, you've talked about training, but there's something Mr. Ononubu mentioned the other time, which I think is something that you also must have experienced while in office. Each region, each state has its peculiarities: language, religion, tradition, and the security challenges themselves are peculiar. How do you see the community policing initiative and the local vigilantes that have worked, over the years to help their different communities? How do you see them working together, factoring in these differences?
The concept of community policing is about you understanding the community in which you are policing. And it becomes so difficult when you are policing a community, you do not even have an idea about their culture. It's so difficult. So I think when we're trying to work out modalities for this program, we should put into consideration who are supposed to drive these policies in these communities. Because I do not subscribe to the situation where somebody from the north going to carry out community policing in the southeast, where he does not even understand the people, their culture, their tradition, their way of life. Crime and criminality differs from one region to the other. The kind of crimes committed in the north might not be the same crime committed in the south. So we find out that we must actually condition policemen to understand the communities in which they are policing. Otherwise, we're still going to be starting.
That's why now with this one, I have people who have said, look, community policing is not what we want. We want our own police. They use the word "our" there, which subscribes to ownership, trust, and all the other components associated with that in their mindset. So What happens when, at the end of the day, they just tell people, look, yes, the government is coming up with this community policing, but it is not what we want? Do you think that that is likely going to happen if they begin implementation of this community policing structure or initiative?
I think the purpose of governance is to bring safety to people, and community policing is about the people. And when we are patriotic, when we are projecting safety of the people, I think this issue of trying to create a kind of situation where people will distrust this program is not going to be good for this country. For the time being, we have a situation at hand where we need absolute maintenance of law and order, and we should be able to start it from these communities, because one of the reasons for this community policing is because of the belief that crime starts from locality. When they are not properly checked, it begins to escalate to a bigger proportion. So I think most of the crime starts from the local communities. And when they are properly checked, that is why the James Wilson and his colleague Kelly also came up with this the broken window theory. Because once you don't prevent crime, you don't prevent lawlessness, you don't prevent civil disobedience in the localities, it begins to build up to a larger crime. So that is a concept, and I think we should be able to gain the confidence of the people and even the government at the various levels, so that this program will succeed.
Mr. Onungo, very, very briefly, trust is a major component from all what both of you have said to ensure the success of this community policing initiative. What must we do to make sure that the trust quotient does not deplete when this community policing initiative kicks off?
Yeah, well, I think we must define what their roles and responsibilities must be. At the moment, we don't have an effective documentation process other than the manual collection of statements and others. We must have a profiling system that is centralized so that when a suspect or a criminal is profiled, any part of this country should have access to that information in the shortest, quickest time. That's one. Secondly, we must also look at equipment. Good enough, they have voted for funds, but even the current serving police establishments are struggling with being properly equipped, provided with facilities that can help them work. For instance, they need to be put in communities, and they have to live not below average. They have to live within the average member of that society, so they don't become moral liabilities or economic liabilities to themselves, to their families, and to their aspirations to serve a country and make a country better. Thirdly, we must put in place very effective program that can breed patriotism, breed sincere sacrifice and commitment to the state, not individuals.
I know that some other people also think that we need to revisit the way the IGPs and the CPs are appointed, such that there could be confidence. If people don't have confidence in those processes, they question that as well. But that is where we have to let it go. We do thank you, Alfred Ononugo, and Mr. Abi Agile, former Commissioner of Police, Kaduna State, and Head of the Police Training Command. Thank you both for talking to us today. All right, so we'll be back in a moment and still talk about policing security-related subject matter. Don't go away.